Hi and welcome back to the Academy for Historical Fencing. So today I'm going to be talking about a range of new products from the Polish company Go Now that make a range of padded training swords. So full disclosure, they saw some of the videos and wanted to send me a box of stuff to give some advice, give some reviews and that kind of thing. Some of the products are entirely new, sort of, I don't know, maybe prototypes or new products that aren't quite available yet. I wanted to do some testing for, like the Dusak and the spear. And some of them are relatively new, just kind of new to me, but have been available for a little time, like the bucklers, for example. But everything I'm going to show today is new to me for the first time, and some of it will be new to you as well. So yeah, full disclosure, it was sent to us for free to do some testing. But in the past, we have bought all of the products from this company for our own use, personally or as a club. So the company Go Now, they're based in Poland, and you can order direct or you can buy these products through a range of resellers like I think the Night Shop, Hema Shop, and a few other companies. So you can buy them from a range of different places, and their products all work out roughly between about 20 and 30 euros per product, if you like, roughly. So they're all very, very affordable, and they're all, almost all of their range is this kind of padded training sword style, which is a bit like a LARP sword as well, of course, but it's designed not for LARP. It's designed for a form of fencing or martial arts use. So they don't try and aim to look like a sword in terms like a LARP sword might do, but more to be a useful sports piece of equipment. And over the last few years, I have carried 4 of their heavy saber models as a beginner weapon to take to the club, because they are exceptionally useful as a beginner weapon, because people can drill without any gear at all, and they can spar with just a fencing mask. And for more experienced people, you can also spar without a fencing mask, but as I said, that has to be more experienced people that understand the risks, because ultimately these are a very safe training weapon, but if you're not wearing a mask at all, there are then inherent risks to eyes, teeth, that kind of thing. So I would recommend wearing a mask. But yeah, as a beginner weapon, these are fantastic, because people can go through their drills with something nice and safe, and then they can spar with just a fencing mask, and that's it. And they can hit fairly hard and go through some fun stuff without any major risks. So I'm a big fan of them as a beginner weapon, before people have started to get things like gloves and fencing jackets and that kind of thing. Because, we use synthetics in the club and we use steel in the club, and synthetics are very much that medium category of equipment. Steel's obviously heavier, and it's expensive, and it's also hot, and it's a lot of gear to lug around, and we do take that kit to every fencing session, but it's not always possible for everybody. And anyway, that's where these foams come in. So what we use them for is as a beginner training tool, and we also use them as a hot weather piece of equipment. So, a couple of events we've gone to where it's, really baking hot, and, you just peel your sweaty kit off you and go straight to these, and they're really good. And, as a training tool, they don't interact quite like a steel weapon. In fact, nothing really quite interacts like a sharp steel weapon anyway. So you compromise with every different sort of type of training tool you have. And personally, I think these foams are an absolutely exceptional add-on to people's training, as either a form of beginner tool or an additional tool for everyone else. And so I'll start with the Dusak, because that's a new product and I know people will be keen to see that. So the Dusak is a form of in the training form, is a form of training tool that was used in the 16th and 17th century, especially in Germany, to practice for that short infantry style of sword that was, because there was the military fighting Dusak or Tesak, and it is a short saber, hanger or cutlass, depending on your terminology. And in the German schools of swordsmanship, they used a very primitive, simple training tool that looks basically like this. And nobody isn't quite sure now whether they were wood or leather or a composite of the two. Certainly today, people have experimented with different training tools for Dusaks, and they've used different kinds of wood, and they have used leather ones and composite wood and leather and rubber and steel and aluminium and all kinds of different things to represent Dusaks. And there are strengths and weaknesses to all of those things. But enter the Go Now Dusak, and obviously you're going to be getting it exceptionally cheap. I haven't seen the price they're going to sell it for yet, but it's surely going to be similar to their saber range. So it is going to be very, very cheap. And with the Go Now padded sword range, they are suitable for very low kit sparring because, okay, they've got a kind of a hard core in them, so they're very, very rigid. So you've got to be a bit more sensible on the thrust, but it means that they're not floppy. They're not flopping all over the place. They're surprisingly robust, but they have a nice foam core so that, you know, when they do actually hit, they don't hit hard. You will notice an impact from them. They can hit with a nice thud, but they're not painful or anything like that. And therefore, these, you're going to be able to jump in and do some Dussac fighting with, you know, minimal to no gear, very cheaply and very easily, and have some fun with it. And the other thing I like about the Dussac, this particular trained Dussac, is it will represent some short swords, other kinds of short swords quite well. So, for example, the briquette, which is a common form of infantry hanger or infantry sidearm in the 18th and 19th century, especially with the French and actually most continental armies. So they used a form of hanger which is basically like this. It's just a knuckle bow short sword, and it will represent that quite well. So that's quite nice. The blade length, 60 centimeters, is about right for a briquette, and also just a range of other hangers and short swords that were in use throughout Europe, and to be honest, in many parts of the world. So you might find this actually is suitable for representing a lot more things than just the Dussac itself. But I know there is demand for Dussac, and I think it'll be interesting for that. So what do I think of this one? It's about 550 grams. It feels like a small version of the Sabre, in the Sabre range that we use. The way the guard's been done, you can see it's been looped around, which of course this is a traditional method that is sometimes used for making steel Dussacs, where you just loop basically what's effectively the tang back on itself into the blade, and that forms the guard for you. And it does a good job, and this is really, really strong, so that is actually rigid inside. And now it's got a little bit of flexibility, and when it first arrived, I was a little bit concerned that things could slide down and do this, but ultimately you're going to be using them against other, you know, go now range stuff, and that blade is a lot thicker than basically the edge of my hand. Will it go through that? I very much doubt it. We're going to have to do some testing, and the reason I'm doing this first impression video right now is because, you know, we're in COVID lockdown, so we can't actually fence, which is a real shame, but we'll be back surely, probably in the new year, and we'll get some really good use out of these. But, you know, I don't mind reviewing them as a first impressions right now because I've had so much experience of their range that I don't mind so much. We haven't just got the sabres, in fact. So Mike also carries the longswords, so we use their longsword range as some beginner tools as well. So yeah, I feel happy to review them already to some degree, and we'll do more thorough testing when we can actually fence with them. So yeah, what's it like? Well, you can see from the size there, it will fit a Red Dragon glove or similar. Personally, when I'm using the Go Now products, I go with either no glove or a simple leather glove. The only reason for that is that as you sweat a fair bit, so after a fair bit of sparring, it can get a bit abrasive on the hands and start to basically, you know, wear the skin. So for shorter bouts, you can go without, and for longer bouts, I would recommend a leather glove. If you want to put on Red Dragons to use these, you absolutely can, because they're going to fit no problem. That's your choice. So yeah, the Dussac, what do I think of it? Well, need to try it, but I think it's going to be really good fun. The size is about right. The guard is quite nicely done. And I think it's going to be a good product. So the weight on this one, I think, was about 550 grams. So it's lightweight, but what you'd expect, you know, of a small short sword trainer. And yeah, so there's the Dussac. I think that's quite interesting. Let's get on to the next thing, which is, you know, people are going to be really keen to see, is the spear. So in fact, when Go Now first reached out to me, this was the kind of thing they mentioned that they wanted me to, you know, to do some testing of. And it's obviously a very different product from everything they've done so far, because they're all about the swords really, and okay, they do some bucklers, which I'll talk about in a bit. But the Go Now spear, so it comes in two parts. So you get this part here, and you get the shaft, okay, with big long threaded section to join it to the two. And they mentioned that this is to make shipping easier. I don't know if that means they're therefore going to make a solid one to kind of sell locally or not, I don't know. But realistically, you know, most of us, particularly most people who watch this channel, don't live in Poland, so you're going to have to get it shipped through the post, and therefore, or the mail, and therefore you're going to get it in two parts like this. So what do I think of that? Well, having something in two parts can potentially create obviously a weak point. That said, that thread, that threaded rod they've put in is so thick and so strong, and the mountains that it goes into seem to also be equally so strong, that I don't think it's going to be a problem. The Knight Shop use, similarly threaded tangs on their swords, and once they actually, put in some basically stronger tangs into them, they've been strong ever since. So we'll have to do some testing on that, but my gut instinct is, they've put a very, very thick, strong thread in there and strong mountings. I think it's going to be okay. And therefore, what's the spear like? Well, first of all, it is 6 foot, roughly. I'm 5'7", so I haven't measured this exactly, but it looks to be 6 foot to me. And obviously that's a bit short for a spear. There were spears that were 6 foot, so it is absolutely legitimate. But more commonly, spears were, usually sort of 7 to 8, roughly speaking. But let's not forget that this is not some, exact replica of anything. This is the padded, sword, in this case spear range, to use in a safer way. And in that regard, I think these could be a good thing. So for a number of reasons. One, the longer you go with spears, the harder they are to transport, because you can't fit them easily in cars, you can't take them on buses and trains and whatever else. So it's a pain in the butt. Whereas these, you can see that's the takedown line there where it drops into 2. So this will actually come apart into pieces that are no longer than any of the other swords that you carry. So you'll fit this in any normal sword bag. That in itself is really, really convenient. Even if you've got a car with a decent amount of space, it is very handy to just be able to drop it down into a normal sword bag. Also kind of cool to bolt your weapon together at training like the Kurgan, so that's always a plus as well. The shaft is surprisingly heavy. I was quite surprised by that. I don't know what they've put into it to make it quite so dense, but it's got a fair bit of mass, whereas the head section doesn't. So what you've ended up with is something with a fair bit of mass, but not at the striking point. So it's fairly light up here. I mean, the blade section is made like all of their blades are, with a hardcore section with the foam over the top. Obviously, being a spear, you're going to be doing some thrust work, and none of the Go Now range has a lot of flex in them. That being said, the shaft itself has got some flex in it, so on impact, you are going to basically flex on the shaft itself. Just bear in mind that, if you're doing thrust work, this is going to hit a little bit harder than their cutting actions do. On that note, though, when we're using pole arms, it's often hard to do any cutting actions because, even a 6 foot hardwood pole, like a bow staff, for example, hits incredibly hard, and it shouldn't be underestimated just how hard a 6 foot lump of hardwood can strike. And this, obviously, being as it's got a little bit of flex and play in the shaft and this foam head, it will actually allow you to basically cut with it, and therefore able to simulate things like a partisan or something like that, something that has not just thrusting ability, but also cutting ability. And in that regard, I think it could be quite interesting. In terms of the flexibility, kind of wobbliness in spear and polearm trainers is potentially one of those problems that comes up, but you always have to weigh up the advantages and disadvantages of realism versus safety, and the effects that you get on realism when the weapon isn't that safe. So if you're using a weapon where you have to pull your blows so much that it's not representing any kind of fight anymore, well, you've already lost the realism, even if the weapon you're using is of realistic specification. So again, we got to do some testing of these. My gut instinct from just handling them is I think they're going to be convenient and easy to take to training. I think they'll give people a fun insight into a bit of spear and other polearm combat, even if they are just a little bit short, and they will allow you to do it in quite a safe way. So I'm actually quite enthusiastic about using these. I think they're going to be quite good fun, so they don't exactly simulate anything in particular, but I think as an kind of an overall cheap, safe polearm of a kind that can also fit in your bag, good fun. And there's also one more thing I'd like to say about that is using them single-handed. So if you want to do some spear and shield stuff, for example, one of the problems when you have spear and shield is that you need a well counterbalanced spear. So when you've got a spear or other polearm in two hands, if it's excessively heavy at the tip, that's no big deal because you've got the leverage of a two-handed grip. But when you hold a spear in one hand, you need it to balance correctly or it's going to be an absolute pig and they're going to be really hard to move around. And because they've got the kind of weighted shaft, it does back weight a little bit. And that means that actually in one hand, I can grip it down here, for example, and actually move around fairly easily. So for doing some one-handed spear and shield stuff, it's actually going to work quite well for that as well. And also, lastly, I would say, being as it is, you know, a two-part piece with that screw thread, there's no reason why you couldn't, if you wanted to, make it longer. That would be easy for any individual to do, is you could just put an extra, basically, extendable piece in and extend it however long you want. Just bearing in mind that it's going to get, you know, wobblier the longer you go. So personally, I'd be inclined to just leave it as is, except that it's a 6-footer and, you know, quite safe to use as is. So I'm really looking forward to using these. Sadly, we can't yet, but we will soon. So that is the Go Now spear. Right, what else should we get on to? The bucklers. So these aren't a new product, but I'd never personally seen them myself before, the little bucklers. And, you know, we'd never bought them because we didn't necessarily have a reason for them, because we don't tend to do sword and buckler necessarily as a beginner weapon. And when we do, I've got so many spare bucklers, it's never really been a problem. So we haven't needed spare bucklers, and that's why I hadn't bought them. But now I've actually got them, I can actually see some really cool advantages to having them. So the first thing is these are really robust. They're not excessively heavy, they're just, whatever materials they've used, they are really, really tough. There's no flex or play. They're a completely rigid buckler that has, you know, a nice squishy basy edge to it, but there's no flex in the actual structure of it. And that goes for the boss as well, so it's really tough. Now, in terms of specification, they're 31 centimeters wide, so just over 12 inches, and that's a completely typical historical diameter. And the weights, they are 620 grams, so a lot lighter than most bucklers that we use in HEMA today. Most bucklers we use in HEMA today are around about, let's say, 950 grams for the cold steel synthetics, ranging then up to about 1 kilo, 1.2 to steel bucklers. But, you know, most bucklers today are of an acceptable weight or usually too heavy. I've actually handled a 16th century buckler in the Royal Armouries collection that is exactly this weight. It was this size and weighed this weight. So they are a realistic weight. They're just right down at the bottom end of the spectrum. So realistic but light. And that is kind of nice, because when people get into sword and buckler, they get exhausted quickly. You know, holding 1 kilo out at this reach doesn't seem like a big deal until you do it for 10-15 minutes. And particularly as a beginner, people just get exhausted from it. And people who are exhausted are not going to train very well at all. So as a beginner tool, having something lightweight is really, really cool. And there are some other nice features about this. So the grip itself is nicely inset into the buckler, which is quite nice. It's always a nice feature. Hides the hand and means that the rotational elements work really, really well. You're not fighting basically the weight of the buckler. The other issues are, well, features, the color-coded band around the outside. So they come in red or blue. That's quite a nice feature I had not even considered, is that if you are running, you know, like a small tournament or something like that, or friendly sparring bouts, you know, how many times have we judged fights where we don't even know the names of the fighter because, you know, we don't know them well enough at an event or whatever else? It happens all the time. Red and blue, absolutely ideal. Also, if you're doing, you know, kids' bats and stuff like that, I should imagine also really, really useful. You can just quickly pick up one buckler each. You don't even have to worry about putting any kind of marker on the person at all, because they've actually got it on their buckler. So the red and blue markers, I think, are a really cool idea. Anything else to say? Well, the only other thought I did have about these is that sometimes in training in HEMA, people stand as a target, as a striking target. Sometimes they hold their fencing mask out or something like that to use as a striking point for the opponent. And actually, this is something that would be really useful for doing that with. So you can actually hold it out and use it as a target for the opponent, and it's not going to get mashed up. It's not going to damage damage the swords. And also it's going to be nice and quiet. So anybody that's done sword and buckler with either synthetic or steel, for that matter, bucklers, will know that they make an absolute racket. And if you have a room full of people doing sword and buckler, it is really, really loud. So, these are significantly quieter. So in that regard, for using them with the foam swords, I think they're going to be really, really fun. As a lightweight trainer for beginners or people new to sword and buckler or kids, awesome. And for any lightweight summer training like we use for the sabers, and they're going to be good. And for kind of like fun little tournament, competitive bouts where you do any kind of judging, you've got the red and blue markers. That's quite cool. I don't see any downsides to these. I mean, they're really, really fat, but I don't see that makes any difference to anything whatsoever. as a training buckler to go with foam swords, I think they're going to be absolutely ideal. And that takes us on to the little Almond sword that I got with this package. So I'm not sure if this is a new product either. I don't think it is. I believe this is one they've had for a while, but don't quote me on that because I haven't had their Almond swords before. So, little one-handed sword. You know, a lot of people who do sword and buckler are keen on using the little Type 14 Almond swords, which are very fat, wide-bladed with quite an acute taper, and they're very short, and they quite like them for the sword and buckler usage because, you know, going into 133 you see a range of Almond swords, and some of them are the really short little stunty Type 14s, and that's kind of what this represents, or, you know, a full-size sword for a child or teenage class. So 750 grams, so it's not light by any means. It'll be a little bit lighter than your steel Type 14s, but not by much. And as you can see, there's very little taper to it. So actually, this has got a fair bit of mass to it, and therefore a fair bit of presence. Which people who use the Type 14s, that's apart from their short size, that's what they really appreciate about them, is that they are really rigid and have massive presence in binds and things like that, and winds. So pairing these two together, this is clearly going to be an awful lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to getting back and trying these out. There's not really much to say about this one other than, you know, it's like the other swords in the range that they sell. It is rigid, it's, you know, nice and padded, so it's going to hit with some authority, but because it's so padded, you'll feel the impact and no real pain into it. But it can hit with a fair bit of force. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily recommend kids go at it full force because a good whack on the head you're still going to feel. But if you put people in fencing masks, you could use these with no other gear and really, really safely. So the guard is completely rigid. It doesn't go floppy or anything like that. And the grip is large enough for an adult hand. And if you wanted, you could wear a Red Dragon glove with that if you so desired. And therefore, little Almond sword, like representing that kind of sword around Type 14 type. I think that's going to be quite good fun. Right. What else do we have? Just one thing left. So they also sent me a pair of these. I believe from their messages that these are entirely designed as kids' knives or kids' swords, depending on the size of the child. These are, I don't have any children, we don't teach children, but I think for what they're designed for, they will be quite useful. So these don't have the core that the other ones do, so they are completely floppy foam. And that means, you know, from a martial arts perspective, you're not going to be able to get in the kind of stuff you do with dagger work, where you get in locks and binds onto the dagger blades and stuff like that. It's going to be hard, but, you know, it's not what these are designed for. These are for kids. And what it's going to allow you to do is to have, you know, kids or whatever using these really, really safely. I mean, an adult could absolutely do a dagger workshop with these, but they are super, super light and obviously very, very flexible. But yeah, as a kids thing that they're not going to damage each other with, probably quite a good idea. And again, the color coding, kind of nice. So yeah, that's all I've got to say about those personally. Now, with Go Now, they did ask me basically for any advice and recommendations on the kits, particularly the new stuff like the Dussac and the spear. Well, as I said, I had that small concern about the Dussac, basically where a blade could get inside the guard, but when I test it with something that is actually as wide as your Go Now products, I don't think it's that likely. Even a really heavy blow, these are so wide, I don't think it's going to be able to get through. And even if you basically tried to get through with the shaft of the spear, it doesn't seem to be happening. So I had that slight concern because this is obviously slightly flexible, but from the tests I've done, I don't think that's a big deal. I quite like the specification. When I first got it, I wasn't sure about the size, so I've got medium-sized hands and I've got a lot of room in here, and I wasn't quite sure if maybe the grip was too large, but I also do appreciate that some people will want to use Red Dragon or similar, you know, hockey or lacrosse gloves or anything like that, and therefore I think it's probably a fairly good universal size that will allow people to do both open hand or bare hand and heavy gloves or medium gloves if you want them. So I don't really have anything to say about the Dussac. I think it's going to work quite well. And yeah, when it comes to the spears, as I said, they don't quite represent anything in particular, and they're a little bit short. but I like the mass they've got in them. I think the flexibility is not too much to cause annoyance, but enough to make it safe. And I suspect they're going to be a good all-round kind of lightweight, easy to carry, simple polearm trainer, even if they are a little bit short. Although saying that, being as you've got them in two parts, I suppose you could make different length shafts or different length ends if you really so much wanted to. Obviously, when it comes down to a spear trainer, there's going to be no flex on the thrust in the blade itself, although there is flex on the shaft. I don't think that's necessarily a problem because they are still padded as long as people are wearing masks and, you know, being a bit sensible. Ultimately, it's a polearm. You know, you can't treat a polearm like a small training sword. It is a polearm after all. And therefore, at this stage, until I've really, or as a club, we've put them into use, I don't think I've got anything more to say about them, other than I think they're quite cool, and I think we're going to have some good fun with them. I'm curious to see how this basically threaded section holds up. I'm curious to see how the flexibility works and how people think, or what people think of the size of them, but I think they're going to be good fun. So the Go Now products, you can buy them from their website. I'll put the link in the description, and you can also buy them from other resellers about the world. And yeah, as I said, we do recommend them, especially as a beginner tool, as a hot weather piece of equipment. We sometimes get them out at parties and barbecues to have a bit of fun with, and you haven't got loads of fencing kit around. So they have lots of practical and fun usages, as well as, of course, for kids training as well, which makes a whole lot of sense. I think, yes, I've covered all their products, so I've now got quite a range here. In the club, we also have 4 of their heavy sabres, and we have either 2 or 4 of their long swords, I can't remember. So we got quite a range, and when we get back to fencing, probably in the new year, we will put them all against one another, have some fun, shoot some videos, and do some more thorough reviews. So yeah, that's the Go Now range. If you've got any questions, please put them in the comment section below. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Thanks for watching.